In the 1800s, child labor increased dramatically during the United States Industrial Revolution. The turning point for child labor came when Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. The FLSA not only protected children and others in the workforce at the time, but laid the foundation for protecting workers for generations and continues to this day. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people did not understand the concept of child labor. In fact, children as young as 4 years old were often part of the workforce. They often spent their entire childhood in fields, factories, and mines instead of school getting education. Children often sacrificed their own health and education. Lower wages earned by children drove down the wages of adult workers. Gender played a big role in child labor. Girls were put to work because people thought them to be less worthy than boys. Poverty was one of the most important reasons that children had to work. In the United States, during the Industrial Revolution, new jobs were created. However, most of these jobs were filled by children. The bigger issue with child labor was not that children were working, but that they were taken advantage in the workplace. Children were typically chosen over adults because instead of paying higher wages for adults to do the same job, children could do the work at a much cheaper rate. They worked long hours in unsafe working conditions for little pay, not permitting them to be children or get an education. Children provide for much of the workforce in the textile industry, canneries, as messengers and newsboys, shoe shiners, and peddlers. They work long hours, almost year-round, in mines, glass factories, and agricultural fields. As America was becoming more industrialized, many poor families had no choice but to send their children to work in order to help the family survive. Working children were often injured due to industrial actions on unsafe machinery. Many died due to workplace accidents. This girl was 51 inches high, had been in the mill for 1 year while getting 48 cents a day and even lied about her age. On the very right side of the picture was Michael McNeils. He was 8 years old and the newest boy. Michael had just recovered from his second attack of pneumonia. A boy named Oyster Sugars was working in a canning factory. He began work at 3:30 a.m. and had to work till 5 p.m. The children's ages in the picture range from 7 to 12. The 7-year-old cut his finger in half, and the children usually earned 75 cents to $1 working from 7 a.m. to midnight. This boy spends all of his day opening and shutting the door for people. Children in cotton mills worked up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The building's windows were often kept closed because moisture and heat helped keep the cotton from breaking. In the coal mines, most boys were paid less than 60 cents per day, working underground 14 hours, 5 to 6 days a week. Crushed and broken fingers were a common part of the job. Cannery work was more seasonal, and it was very common for children as young as 6 and 7 years old to do this work. Their days would begin at 3 a.m. During peak season, children might work 18 hours a day. They carried boxes of produce weighing 40 pounds or more. Children 3 and 4 years old often worked unpaid as helpers. In the fields, many children worked land that did not belong to their own families. Their living conditions were terrible. They often crammed together in one shack with no running water. They worked late into the evenings and often did not have a meal breaks despite being in hot fields all day. There was a long history of child labor in the United States, and it took decades to reform. By the 1900s, 18% of all American workers were under the age of 16. An estimated 218 million children between 5 and 17 worked as child laborers. Before the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, children were left uneducated as they spent their days working. Further, they did not have proper food and shelter because of low wages. The United States spent millions of dollars every year dedicated to the protection of animals, forests, and plants, but nothing to do with the protection of children from the child labor. The Babies Who Work was an article written by a professor of social economy at Columbia, where he argued that a children's bureau should be created to study the harm caused by child labor. In 1904, the National Child Labor Committee, NCLC, was established to look more closely at the impact of child labor in the United States. By 1912, after failing at the state reform, the NCLC began pushing for a change at the federal level. The NCLC and other groups fighting for children's rights worked for decades to see change. For example, a law in 1833 allowed children aged 9 to 13 to work as much as 9 hours a day, and kids 13 to 18 years old could work 12 hours. It did not help that children supported by struggling families would often lie about their ages in order to work more and help put food on the table. Regardless of the 1833 law, children were left uneducated and were often sick, diseased, injured, or even killed from exposure to unsafe working conditions. In 1916, Congress passed the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act. This was the first national legislation addressing child labor. Opposed by manufacturers and industry leaders, in 1918 the Supreme Court ruled Keating-Owen unconstitutional. Another attempt at regulations in 1919 was also held illegal. Even families of child workers were relieved at these outcomes. Parents needed children's wages just to survive, as low wages left everyone needed to contribute. Groups continued to push workers' protections, and Franklin D. Roosevelt committed his presidential campaign to fighting for the working class. Once elected, he continued to battle for change. President Roosevelt wanted to stimulate and rebuild the economy through a series of economic programs. The FLSA was enacted as one part of several others, together known as the New Deal, to help the U.S. recover from the Great Depression. At the time the FLSA was passed, Congress found that low wages caused one-third of the U.S. population to be ill-nourished, ill-clad, and ill-housed. The FLSA set a minimum wage, 25 cents per hour. It also set 16 as the minimum age for most non-agricultural work. The work week was also limited to 44 hours per week. The passage of the FLSA allowed for children to begin having childhoods. Along with mandatory school attendance laws, this led to a significant impact on the U.S. education system. As more children were required to go to school and not spend 12 hours per day working, more children completed high school. This created a more educated workforce. More education led to increases in the number of years school needed for some jobs. The invention of better machinery meant children were not needed for repetitive tasks. Semi-skilled adults took their place for harder jobs. Most schooling became required, the school year got longer, and truancy laws were enforced. Over time, attitudes changed, machinery replaced child workers, and more schooling was required to hold certain jobs. The FLSA now helps children get the education they deserve, along with fair wages and safer working conditions for others. Under the FLSA, any workers under the age of 20 must be paid $4.25 per hour while in their first 90 days of being employed. Workers with disabilities may be paid less under special certificates. Issued by the Department of Labor, workers under the age of 16 may not be employed during school hours. The FLSA helps ensure that children's work is safe and does not get in the way of their education. The FLSA also set minimum wages for children at work. The FLSA provides a federal minimum wage, additional pay for overtime, and child labor protections. The FLSA covers most employers in the private and public sector. In 1989, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This shows that all children have the right to education and requires governments to ban it when it interferes with a child's education. As Kalish Sadarthi, founder of the Global Campaign of Education, imparting education one cannot be achieved without the other. The Children Harmed in Life-Threatening or Dangerous Labor Act works towards shutting down employers who have been violating child labor laws with stronger punishments, as well as allowing any children who have been seriously injured to sue their employers. In the U.S., in 2023, campaigns in violation of child labor laws employed 5,792 children, most often migrant children. The Department of Labor, which enforces child labor laws, will help with migrant children in workplaces and factories. Focusing on global campaign issues, the Department of Labor is also setting the law to stop transport of goods where children have been found in major supply chains, including Walmart and Target, and many more. Department officials have also planned to ask Congress to expand penalties for violators.